good afternoon, all. And my video today is about what happens if RFK Jr., with his preformed conclusion that autism is an epidemic, assembles these researchers with the help of the NIH, and he uses them as a hired gun under David Geer, and they come out with their conclusion, their quickie conclusion by September, that confirms with a confirmation bias that autism is an epidemic by using epidemiologists to conduct this medical research to fit RFK Jr.'s preformed conclusion. Well, as I will demonstrate in this video, the response of all of us, all Americans, including the autism community and the autistic community, should be a big so what? And I'll explain why that is. So let's get started. I'm going to start here with Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s April 16, 2025 incitement call for the American public to fear autism and autistic people. And here, given that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. graduated from an American Bar Association accredited law school, just like I did, I'm going to liken his incitement call to fear to an analogous situation that we all are taught in law school textbooks is not protected First Amendment speech, and that's the person who is in a crowded theater and stands up and says, "Fire! Fire! There's a fire in the theater." The two situations are not very different. Let's hear Robert F. Kennedy's April 16th incitement to fear the autistic people.
I am honored to introduce to you Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
I'm going to go over some of the key numbers from the ADDM report. Overall, the autism is increasing in prevalence at an alarming rate. We don't wait 2 years to react to a measles epidemic, and we should not, or any kind of infectious disease. We shouldn't have to do that for diabetes or autism. The ASD prevalence rate in 8-year-olds is now 1 in 31. Shocking. This is part of an unrelenting upward trend. In all the core states, the trend is consistently upward. The relentless increases. This is a preventable disease. We know it's an environmental exposure. It has to be. Genes do not cause epidemics. They can provide a vulnerability. You need an environmental toxin.
Autism is striking, and the consequences are lifelong. So I would urge everyone to consider the likelihood that autism, whether you call it an epidemic, a tsunami, or a surge of autism, is a real thing that we don't understand.
You know, we have really good genetic markers now, and they provide a vulnerability. But those genetic markers alone are not going to dictate your destiny. You need an environmental toxin. There are many genetic markers that dictate the methylation capacity of the human body. Those contribute to, those dictate, listen, with many people smoke cigarettes, and only 1 in 5 died from lung cancer. Those were the ones that had some circumstances, probably genetic, that made them more susceptible to it. And the same is true. We know that that glutathione production, and glutathione is an enzyme that helps the human body excrete metals and toxins. People with low glutathione production are more vulnerable. People with the MTHFR gene, which dictates methylation, are more vulnerable. People with high testosterone are more vulnerable. So there are a lot of genetic vulnerabilities. You need an environmental toxin.
As I dive into my explanation that leads to the crux of the problem, I want to give a characterization to the autistic thinking style being used by RFK Jr. and how they're going about the methodology of finding the cause of autism. I think anyone who knows anything about autism and autistic people will instantly recognize this kind of an example. Let's say that we're all looking at a scenic photograph of a forest at sunset. The neurotypical perception of this picture, this photograph, will be to look at the big picture. So a neurotypical viewer might describe the photo as a beautiful sunset over a peaceful forest, focusing on the overall composition, mood, and harmony of colors, warm light, silhouetted trees, and soft clouds. The autistic perception is a detail focus. And so an autistic viewer, and this is what Robert F. Kennedy are doing, might immediately notice something hyper-specific, like a single broken branch on one tree in the corner, or a pattern of moss on a single rock, or a visual artifact like a tiny JPEG compression glitch near the edge of the photograph. This is the methodology that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and David Gayer, who are overseeing the medical researchers, here's the ultimate problem of what you hear at RFK Jr.'s April 16th, 2025 Autism Press Conference, and how he's laying out the methodology of how he's going about finding the cause of autism, which notably he first calls it an infectious disease, and then he calls it an environmental toxin as the culprit, without acknowledging that an infectious disease and an environmental toxin are two entirely different things. But he apparently didn't vet Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s script for his April 16th, 2025 Autism Press Conference, because when he's calling it an infectious disease on the one hand and an environmental toxin on the other hand, it's inconsistent on its face. Oops. But here's what happens in the autistic style of thinking methodology that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is using, along with David Gayer to oversee it, in his getting a quickie answer by September of the cause of autism. They might become fixated on that one hyper-specific detail that a neurotypical person would call irrelevant. Curious about why that branch is broken, or how moss grows like that, or even annoyed by the pixelation in the picture, while not immediately processing or commenting on the overall big picture, emotional tone, or composition of that image. Why it matters. This example illustrates the classic autistic strength in detail-oriented perception known as weak central coherence, which can be incredibly useful in certain fields like science, art, or engineering, but it can also lead to misunderstandings when people expect the big picture to come first. So, having said that, when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is standing up there at his Autism Press Conference on April 16, 2025, and he's trying to start yelling fire in the theater that autism is an infectious disease, or we know it's caused by an environmental toxin, what he's doing is he is focusing in on only the small detail of the broken branch. And he's not leveling up with the American public and being honest by giving us the big picture. What big picture? The big picture of human evolution and how it works. Let's humor Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for a minute and take him arguendo at his word with his autism theories. Let's just say for a moment that when he tries to call autism an infectious disease, what that means, what he's referring to, is a virus. But what about viruses? Did every American fail basic science class or something? Does he think the American people are that stupid? Well, many viruses are known to cause disease. Some viruses within the human genome, particularly endogenous retroviruses, ERVs, and some bacteriophages, can actually be beneficial. Well, we're not hearing that from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., that a virus can be beneficial. ERVs, remnants of ancient viral infections, can protect against other viruses and even influence placental development. What does this mean? An ancient human virus that embedded itself in the human genome. What that is that's evolution. That's another word for evolution, because these ancient viruses are still in our human genomes. This didn't happen in around 1989. It didn't happen when Leo Kanner first spotted autism. These are ancient viruses, long-standing ancient evolutionary viruses. Well, let's look at beneficial viruses and their role. Beneficial viruses and their roles. Endogenous retroviruses, ERVs, protection against infections. ERVs can produce proteins that help block other viruses from infecting cells, as reported by the National Institutes of Health. Say what? Robert F. Kennedy Jr. didn't disclose to us, to the American public, that an endogenous retrovirus, if he's saying that autism is caused by a virus, maybe the virus is actually protecting us by blocking other viruses from infecting cells. So maybe it's not even an infectious disease at all. Maybe it is a beneficial part of our human evolutionary trajectory. Placental development. ERVs may contribute to genes important for placental function and may improve pregnancy outcomes. Say what? If it wasn't for some of these beneficial viruses, these ancient viruses, endogenous retroviruses, what are you saying? Are you saying that even Christians might not ever have been born? That's a possibility, because what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is doing is he's giving us a creationist approach to the cause of autism and the autism registry. None of us would be born, none of us autistics, none of us neurotypicals. It's possible humans might have gone extinct if it wasn't for these ancient viruses that embedded themselves in our genomes, that actually contribute to successful pregnancy outcomes and more babies being born. Immune regulation. ERVs can potentially affect immune responses and may contribute to the balance of the immune system. For example here, the GB virus C results in slower HIV progression and reduced risk of death from the Ebola virus. Say what? Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not forthright enough to tell the American public that some viruses help us? That when you hear the word virus, they don't all mean it's an infectious disease? That's right. Attorneys, under their rules regulating the bar, usually if you read those rules, there will be a rule that says candor to the court. Well, what about being truthful to the American public? Other beneficial viruses. Certain noroviruses, such as the murine norovirus, may promote the development of the intestine and associated immune system. Some viruses, like the cytomegalovirus, can protect against infections like listeria and bubonic plague, according to Harvard Medicine Magazine. The National Institutes of Health, who are conducting these autism research projects for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., themselves say ancient viral DNA may help humans fight infections. Science alert! Not all viruses are bad for you. But the way Robert F. Kennedy Jr. slants his Autism Press Conference wants to make the American public think all viruses are bad for you. BBC published an article here on May 20th, 2023 by Michael Marshall on the topic of the viruses that help to make you human. Say what? Robert F. Kennedy Jr. didn't tell the American public that some viruses made us human? Although they are more commonly associated with causing disease and at times devastating pandemics, viruses have also played an important role in human evolution, and without them, you wouldn't be here. About 1/10 of the human genome comes from viruses. That viral DNA has played crucial roles in our evolution. Some of it was the source of the mammalian placenta. Other bits are involved in our immune response against disease and in the formation of new genes. Without viruses, humans could not have evolved. ERVs everywhere. The sheer scale of human ERVs was revealed when the first draft of the human genome was published in 2001. About 8% of the human genome consists of ERVs. Some of them are truly ancient. One study in 2013 identified an ERV on the human chromosome 17 that is at least 104 million years old and probably older. That means it is the result of a virus infecting a mammal deep in the era when dinosaurs ruled the earth. ERVs are not confined to mammals and reptiles either. All vertebrates have endogenous retroviruses. Most human ERVs are not unique to our species, but can also be found in at least some other primates, such as chimpanzees. This means they got into primate genomes millions of years ago, long before our own species evolved, and we then inherited them from our ape ancestors. Some ERVs help the immune system to target cancerous cells. It turns out that many human ERVs are active. The story of syncytins and the placenta is one of the most dramatic examples of viral DNA affecting evolution. Many other ERVs do not encode proteins, but they still have functions. Some play a role in stem cells, the multipurpose cells found in developing embryos. Some stem cells are pluripotent, meaning they can develop into any type of cell in the body, from neurons to muscle fibers. Other ERVs regulate the activity of genes and therefore control bodily processes. For example, our bodies use an enzyme called amylase to break down carbohydrates like starch in our food. The key point is that human ERVs are not capable of forming viruses, which could then infect other cells. The role of ERVs in disease is shrouded for now, but what is clear is that they are an engine of evolution. By inserting new bits of DNA throughout our genome, viruses have spurred massive changes to our genetic makeup. Once ERVs are in place, they can trigger the duplication or deletion of swaths of DNA. And if the changes are beneficial, they spread. No animal, including humans, would exist in its current form without them. The final lesson is that humans are a truly mosaic species. Many of us have some DNA, around 2% in our genome, from Neanderthals. Some populations also have some DNA from another extinct hominin group, the Denisovans. And all of us get around 8% of our genome from viruses. If you think about the human gene catalog, it's kind of almost an existential question. Around 20,000 protein-coding genes are known, and a comparable quantity of our DNA comes from viruses. That's the part of the story that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. didn't bother to tell the American public. Let's humor Robert F. Kennedy Jr. a little more, and let's turn to his claim that it must be an environmental toxin. And on this point, you have to ask, what does Robert F. Kennedy Jr., autism, and Chernobyl dogs have to do with each other? Well, we know what happened in Chernobyl. In Chernobyl, there was a nuclear meltdown with a lot of radiation, and when the people living around Chernobyl were evacuated, well, many of their dogs got left behind, and they continued to live in this radiation zone. And maybe people thought that they probably died. That's not the case. That's not what happened. So scientists have started to study the Chernobyl dogs. Well, here's an AI overview of the situation. The dogs of Chernobyl exhibit several potentially beneficial traits, including accelerated genetic divergence, possible radiation-linked mutations, reduced genetic diversity, immune system adaptations, and altered pigmentation. These adaptations may include increased resistance to environmental stressors like radiation, cold, and food scarcity, and even a greater resistance to cancer. Environmental toxins are not limited to toxins in the air we breathe, in the water we drink, in the ground we build our houses on or walk on. Environmental toxins are not limited to toxins from chemicals in our water bottles or any of these other kinds of toxins that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is studying. Toxins include things like radiation. Radiation is a toxin. And there's many other toxins throughout human evolution and evolution in the human lineage and even before that organisms and living beings have been subjected to. So this post-industrial age environment that we're now finding ourselves in, where President Trump is ending environmental protections through the EPA and the FDA, he can't be too concerned that environmental toxins are causing autism if he's ending all of these protections we've had against these kind of toxins. That's what makes me think that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. may have conned our president. But let's continue about what happened when these Chernobyl dogs were studied after they were insulted with this environmental toxin of radiation. Here's a more detailed look. Accelerated genetic divergence. The dogs in the Chernobyl exclusion zone show rapid genetic changes compared to non-radiated populations, suggesting a strong evolutionary pressure. Radiation-linked mutations. While not definitively proven, some scientists believe low-dose ionizing radiation may be influencing the development of beneficial mutations for survival. Say what? Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wasn't 100% honest and forthright because he didn't tell the American people that some toxins can result in the evolution of beneficial mutations. Reduced genetic diversity. Inbreeding within the small Chernobyl exclusion zone population could be shaping the dog's gene expression, potentially leading to unique adaptations. Immune system adaptations. There are indications that these dogs may have enhanced resistance to environmental stressors, including radiation exposure and other contaminants. Altered pigmentation. Some dogs, like the blackened frogs in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, exhibit darker coats, possibly as a defense against radiation. Potential for cancer resistance. The dog's genetic mutations could potentially lead to increased resistance to cancer, a concern for those exposed to radiation. Survival and resilience. The dog's ability to survive and thrive in the harsh environment of the Chernobyl exclusion zone demonstrates the remarkable resilience and adaptation. As Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said in his April 16, 2025 Autism Press Conference, yes, there's an underlying genetic basis to autism. But like a bad legal brief writer, hiding the most important point in the footnotes, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. brushes that off. What do they say about the role that genetics plays in autism? This is an AI overview. There are many studies. Yes, genetics plays a significant role in the development of autism. Studies, including twin studies and family studies, indicate that around 60 to 90% of autism risk is attributed to genetic factors. While genetics is a major contributor, it's not the sole factor, and environmental influences may also play a role. Here's a more detailed explanation. Heritability. Research suggests that autism is highly heritable, meaning that it tends to run in families. Twin studies. Studies comparing autism rates in identical monozygotic and fraternal dizygotic twins show that when one identical twin has autism, there's a higher chance the other twin will also have it compared to fraternal twins. Genetic variations. Researchers have identified numerous genes and regions of the DNA that are associated with an increased risk of developing autism. These variations can be inherited from parents or occur spontaneously in individuals. Polygenic risk. Many different genetic variations, each with a small individual effect, can combine to increase the overall risk of autism. Environmental factors. While genetics are a major factor, environmental factors also contribute to autism, and the interplay between genes and environment is complex. Okay, so what does that mean? If genetics are the primary reason somebody is autistic, but environmental factors can influence whether somebody is autistic also, what does that mean? In a nutshell, what it means is that autism is part of human evolution. How do we know that? Well, we already know that if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is saying autism is an infectious disease, well, we know that ancient viruses have been a part of human evolution, up to 8% of the modern human genome. So no surprise there that at the end of the day, what he's still talking about is that autism is an evolutionary phenomenon. What about toxins?
At the dawn of humanity 790,000 years ago, Earth's magnetic field broke down, an event that may have led to the eventual rise to Homo sapiens. The abrupt divergence of ancient human lineages continues to be one of the great enigmas of human evolution. But when studying the ancient past, one time period comes up over and over. As we shall see, the world experienced several few millennia of apocalyptic conditions around 790,000 years ago, triggered by a reversal of the Earth's magnetic pole. The last permanent magnetic field reversal took place about 790,000 years ago, but it also came very close to reversing 42,000 years ago. The geomagnetic reversal 42,000 years ago triggered a series of dramatic events that had far-reaching consequences for our planet. The ozone layer was destroyed, electrical storms raged across the tropics, solar winds generated spectacular auroras, Arctic air poured across North America, ice sheets and glaciers surged and weather patterns shifted violently. Sometimes, for reasons scientists do not fully understand, the magnetic field becomes unstable and its north and south poles can flip. The last major reversal, though it was short, happened around 42,000 years ago. During these events, life on Earth was exposed to intense ultraviolet light, megafauna went extinct, while humans sought protection in caves. In Europe, the Neanderthal spiraled into extinction. With essentially no magnetic field, our planet totally lost its shield against cosmic radiation, and many more of these very penetrating particles from space could access the top of the atmosphere. These climate events are consistent with the environmental shifts observed in many natural climate and environmental change records. These same environmental effects would have happened 790,000 years ago, except they last 22,000 years instead of 400 years. During that era, Homo erectus ruled the planet, rather than the Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens.
No, it's not true. That's impossible!
The full reversal of Earth's magnetic field took far longer than was previously thought, scientists discovered. By analyzing ancient volcanic rocks, researchers found the reversal took about 22,000 years to complete, with the field starting to collapse about 795,000 years ago. Earth's magnetic field is believed to be generated within the planet's iron core. It extends far out into space, and helps protect the atmosphere from the solar wind, a stream of charged particles from our sun. Without the magnetic field, the particles would strip away the atmosphere, allowing harmful radiation through and eventually leaving Earth a lifeless, barren planet, as happened on Mars billions of years ago. The magnetic field is dynamic, it moves around and becomes stronger and weaker over time. It is also known to reverse, with the magnetic north and south pole flipping positions. This has happened many times over the planet's history. Measurements show the magnetic field started to collapse about 795,000 years ago. It became unstable and there were two partial reversals over the course of 18,000 years, before a full reversal that took about 4,000 years to complete. The dramatic changes and unprecedented high UV levels would have caused ancient humans to seek shelter in caves just like the more recent flip, and it must have seemed like the end of days. This occurred 781,000 years ago, when ancient humans split into two groups, one that became the Denisovans and Neanderthals, and one that became us. Indeed, genetic evidence suggests that Denisovan mitochondrial DNA diverged from that of modern humans and Neanderthals about 779,300 years ago. Fossilized skulls reveal little about the brain underneath, but a gene mutation may have changed critical neural processes, such as speech and language. Experiments with minibrains in the lab have proven that small mutations created the differences between Neanderthal and modern human brains. Moreover, the mitochondrial DNA of Neanderthals and modern humans became incompatible during a particularly long, cold ice age, leading to the biological separation of those groups around 400,000 years ago. Very likely, the same genetic mutations happened 800,000 years ago too, resulting in population bottlenecks.
Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. But researchers from the University of New South Wales and the South Australian Museum may have discovered another event that would have affected humanity. They believe there is strong evidence that 42,000 years ago, the Earth's magnetic poles switched. So, what does that mean for life on Earth? Well, the magnetic field would thin to a small fraction of normality, causing cataclysmic environmental effects which would have certainly devastated human populations. Solar flares, ionized air, aurora and electric storms would have been frightening, and caused a major change in human behaviour. Humans would have needed to seek shelter, and I would assume something better and more substantial than a typical house of the day. But the scientists believe that the polar reversal could well be the reason why we see a dramatic increase in the amount of cave art at various locations around the world 42,000 years ago. Professor Alan Cooper, who is part of the project, said, "We think the sharp increase in UV levels, particularly during solar flares, would suddenly make caves very valuable shelters. The common cave art motif of red ochre handprints may signal it was being used as sunscreen, a technique still used today by some groups, making it appear that art suddenly started 42,000 years ago. The temporary flipping of magnetic poles, a process that lasts around 800 years, is called the Lachamps excursion, but the specific flip 42,000 years ago is known as the Adams event." The new paper is available now at sciencemag.org and is titled A Global Environmental Crisis 42,000 Years Ago. The scientists noted a substantial increase in the carbon-14 content of the atmosphere at this time, culminating during the period of weakening magnetic field strength preceding the polarity switch. With no magnetic field, our planet loses its effective shield against cosmic radiation. Also at this time, the Sun experienced several grand solar minima, and although this means that solar activity was much lower, it also means it is far more unstable, with the release of numerous massive solar flares allowing powerful ionizing cosmic rays to reach Earth. The devastating effects cause substantial changes in atmospheric ozone concentration and circulation, driving synchronous global climate shifts that cause major environmental changes, extinction events, and transformations in the archaeological record. Maybe they were not as primitive as we may think. Maybe they were simply the survivors. But the Adams event reinforces just how vulnerable we are as a human race. One day, maybe humans will all be in caves again. And maybe the only thing we can do to pass the time is draw on the walls.
Robert F. Kennedy at his April 16, 2025 Autism Press Conference just brushed away genetic causes of autism by basically saying they've studied this for decades, it's over now, they haven't found enough reason through genetic causes to say that heritability or genetics causes autism, and like a person standing in a dark theater who starts screaming, "Fire, fire!" Robert F. Kennedy tries to incite the American public that it either has to be an infectious disease or environmental toxin that is causing this unprecedented rise in autism. But now, as we have seen through human evolution, there have been numerous environmental catastrophes to the human lineage and environmental events, and anyone could describe radiation or cosmic radiation as just such an environmental toxin. No one's saying there are not other environmental toxins, particularly today. The problem is that if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. think that simply by stopping and preventing autism, or worse yet, getting rid of all the autistic people have done by putting us on a registry and the whole cascade of events. They're very mistaken. They're mistaken because autism is evolutionary. Because viruses and environmental toxins have shaped human evolution. Because in the industrial era, in the post-industrial era, we're living with polluted air, polluted water, polluted ground, microplastics that are getting into the human body, BPA, all sorts of toxins, chemical toxins. We live in a toxin soup and cannot dig humanity out of this toxin soup that we are living in. Even if he tried to get rid of autistic people, the evolutionary response in the human lineage would keep producing autism. More autism and more autism. If you got rid of all of the autistic people, autism would keep popping out of the neurotypical population. It's like trying to stick his finger in a giant hole in a sinking ship that's taking on water. It's an impossibility. Let's look at this a little further. Let's look at this most significant autism causation claim. These video clips I've shown in this video demonstrate there's been a long evolutionary history to the human lineage going back far more than 800,000 years ago. And there have been repeated catastrophes to the earth. There have been extremely warm periods, far warmer than today's climate, extremely cold ice ages. There's been comet strikes like the Younger Dryas. There's been cosmic radiation events like 800,000 years ago and 42,000 years ago. And humans have responded by evolutionary adaptation to those changes. Why should we think it's any different today? Robert F. Kennedy Jr. doesn't answer that question. Let's take a look at this research study paper itself. And what sticks out as a sore thumb in Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s April 16, 2025 Autism Press Conference is that he doesn't make one single mention of this paper. This is actually a groundbreaking genetics and autism paper. But no mention by RFK Jr. Every time we turn around, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is calling autism a disease and a deficit to be stopped and prevented, and he doesn't once acknowledge the beneficial traits of autistic people. This is the paper. It's open access here in Nature, enrichment of a subset of Neanderthal polymorphisms in autistic probands and siblings, and this is in 2020. The paper starts by saying Homo sapiens in Neanderthals underwent hybridization during the Middle Upper Paleolithic age, culminating in retention of small amounts of Neanderthal-derived DNA in the modern human genome. This study, as we can see, is using data from the Simons Foundation Powering Autism Research Spark Genotype Tissue Expression genome databases. And these are specific autism genetics databases. And from this study, these results strongly suggest Neanderthal-derived DNA is playing a significant role in autism susceptibility across major populations in the United States. Say what, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? You didn't even mention this? What? But you're going to give us the answer by September about what causes autism. Do you really think the American people are going to believe that? when you're leaving big parts out of the story, out of the big picture. The paper starts, DNA evidence taken from human remains in the Middle Pleistocene indicate that anatomically modern humans and other archaic humans underwent multiple introgression events. What that means is they interbred with each other and they had sex and they produced offspring who became us today, living humans today. It has been estimated that Eurasian-derived populations have approximately 2% Neanderthal DNA, which was acquired during introgression events occurring shortly after anatomically modern humans migrated out of Africa. These hybridization events occurred somewhere between 47,000 to 65,000 years ago. A subset of Europeans later immigrated back into Africa approximately 20,000 years ago, bringing some of this Neanderthal ancestry with them. With the recent sequencing of multiple archaic human genomes, there has been growing interest concerning the influence of archaic human-derived alleles on modern health. With regards to Neanderthal-derived variants, previous groups have identified positive selection on genes relating to immune function, skin and hair pigmentation, physiological responses to high-altitude conditions, aspects of metabolization, hypercoagulation, and propensity for depression. In general, dosage-sensitive genes are tightly conserved and resistant to such introgression events. Most genes involved in brain development follow this dosage-sensitive pattern and have tended to be resistant to introgression. In support of this, Srinivasan et al. Found a depletion of Neanderthal-derived variants with autism and other brain-related genes in the general population. That would be neurotypicals. On the other hand, other studies have reported a number of non-synonymous and other single nucleotide variants within neural genes that have been implicated in the condition. Additional research involving non-clinical populations has identified strong links between certain brain and skull morphologies and enrichment of Neanderthal DNA. Specifically, enrichment is associated with reduced globularity in the skull shape of modern populations, a finding mildly reminiscent of the elongated skull morphology characteristic of Neanderthal and other archaic crania. Enrichment of Neanderthal DNA is also associated with enhanced neural connectivity within visual processing systems, particularly between the intraparietal sulcus and the occipital cortex and fusiform gyrus, and decreased connectivity within the default mode social network. Importantly, many of these same connectivity patterns are recapitulated in autism, which is a major impetus for the current work. Autistic people also have cognitive strengths in areas such as mathematics. Visual processing modalities are an area of strength in autism. Interestingly, many of these features are shared by non-clinical groups with high Neanderthal DNA content. In light of this evidence, in the current study, we addressed whether Neanderthal DNA is enriched in autistic people and their siblings compared to ethnically matched controls, that is, i.e. neurotypicals. Significantly, enrichment in the autism group was especially driven by rare Neanderthal-derived variants, but also some common variants, which suggests weak but ongoing purifying selection toward removal of some of these single nucleotide polymorphisms from the human genome. Discussion. Neanderthals experienced a prolonged genetic bottleneck leading to greater retention of non-synonymous mutations within their dwindling population, suggesting some of these variants may still be represented in the human genome today. Here we report an enrichment of a subset of rare and common Neanderthal-derived polymorphisms in autism across three major ethnic groups: Black non-Hispanic, White Hispanic, and White non-Hispanic. Even small numbers of key variants in such genes as a result of their relative intolerance may nevertheless be keenly felt. In addition, it is vital to understand the contexts under which Homo sapiens-specific variation occurred. Hybridization in non-human species is recognized as a destabilizing event with the potential to promote compensatory adaptation in other regions of the genome and ultimately speciation in some lineages. Therefore, there is an additional possibility that Homo sapiens-specific variants that evolved after Neanderthal introgression may nevertheless be influenced by these earlier events. So one thing that's important to notice from this study is that autism is an evolutionary speciation variant that is diverging from the neurotypical human population. And this is what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is trying to get at, which he doesn't mention. Autism is an evolutionary speciation variant that is diverging from the neurotypical human population. And this is what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is trying to get at, which he doesn't mention. Neanderthal DNA, social cognition, and visual processing. The roles that some Neanderthal-derived variants play in connectivity within the intraparietal sulcus and their concomitant influence on social abilities and visual processing have implications for some of the clinical features of autism. Given the results of the current studies, some may ask whether features of autism are reminiscent of behavior seen in Neanderthal people. Relevance, recent evidence from numerous individuals from the Altai mountain of southern Siberia has shown that their genomes held long segments of homozygosity indicative of small breeding pools. From these and other data, the authors make inferences about Neanderthal social organization, reinforcing previous notions that they likely lived in small communities. Previous studies have found that social group size of a primate species is strongly predictive of overall neocortical size, suggesting links between group size and cognitive function. Well, Neanderthals appear to have maintained more regional patterns of social interaction. Early European anatomically modern humans seem to have engaged in broader, better integrated social networks. An interesting topic for future research is whether Neanderthal-derived socio-behavioral tendency may be reflected in some people on the autism spectrum. Conversely, individuals on the autism spectrum often exhibit strengths in visuospatial processing. While an extensive array of tool-making techniques is associated with anatomically modern humans in the Upper Paleolithic, it should be noted that the Levallois technique, which is most associated with Neanderthal societies in the Middle Paleolithic, is thought to require more skill and training than those necessary to produce the later Upper Paleolithic blades, indicating that Neanderthals were indeed capable of exceptional craftsmanship. Recent research has also revealed additional decorative artistry in Neanderthal societies, with evidence of the use of flight feathers culled from birds of prey for probable personal adornment, as well as early examples of cave art. Relevant to the fields of paleoanthropology and paleoarchaeology, there are numerous examples of autistic savants with exceptional visuospatial abilities, e.g. artistic ability, who nevertheless have significant challenges with verbal communication, suggesting that the use of visual symbolism in ancient humans is not necessarily an adequate proxy for presumed language ability, as these are modular functions. Pertinent to the topic of autistic abilities and savantism, although most studies on autism genomics focus on the deleterious nature of variants, there is the possibility some of these autism-associated Neanderthal SNPs have been under weak positive selection. In support, recent studies have identified genetic variants implicated in both autism and high intelligence. Meanwhile, autistic people often perform better on tests of fluid intelligence than neurotypicals. The variable penetrance of these Neanderthal variants for autism, as evidenced by similar patterns of enrichment in unaffected siblings, as well as enrichment of some common variants, suggest a means for their retention. In further support, studies on the cognitive ability of unaffected siblings show sibs tend to have higher performance IQ scores relative to verbal IQ, a pattern very similar to affected siblings and different from neurotypicals. In addition, families of students studying disciplines like math, physics, and engineering are more likely to have autistic family members than students studying the humanities, suggesting an extended cognitive phenotype exists. Of potential relevance to this topic, paleoarchaeologists have identified an Upper Paleolithic revolution beginning around 50,000 years ago, which was a change in the ways anatomically modern humans made tools, traveled, and engaged in trade, used and produced artistic materials, and structured their living habitats, such as dividing the home into food preparation, discard, cooking, and sleeping areas. Interestingly, this time period roughly coincides with hybridization between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, suggesting hybridization may have been a stimulus for cognitive change, one which may continue to influence intellectual ability and susceptibility to neurodevelopmental conditions in modern humans. So, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. don't mention any of those findings in that very recent 2024 paper on autism. Why not? Well, it doesn't fit their narrative that autism is an epidemic, an infectious disease caused by toxins and needs to be stopped or prevented, and is a catastrophe that will take down our country. It doesn't fit that narrative. They tossed it in the garbage can. Simply crumpled up that paper and tossed it in the garbage can. The American people deserve better.
Imagine a world where two species of humans, each with their unique evolutionary strengths, came together. Neanderthals, physically gifted specimens, were the apex of raw strength and resilience, perfectly adapted to the harsh climates of Ice Age Europe. Their robust frames, immense musculature, and extraordinary endurance made them formidable hunters and survivors. On the other hand, Homo sapiens, less physically imposing, relied on their cerebral and tactical minds to navigate the challenges of survival. They thrived through innovation, collaboration, and adaptability, wielding their intelligence like a finely honed tool. Now, imagine the union of these two human species through interbreeding, a hybrid child born with the best of both worlds. Theoretically, a hybrid between a Neanderthal and a Homo sapiens would be a remarkable blend of traits. Physically, such a child could inherit the Neanderthal's powerful build, a sturdy frame, thick bones, and the strength to endure the rigors of a world teeming with danger. With this physical prowess, they would excel in tasks demanding brute strength, such as hunting large game or surviving extreme cold. Yet, alongside these physical gifts, the hybrid might also possess the Homo sapiens mind, a keenly analytical brain with the capacity for abstract thought, strategic planning, and social cooperation that enabled our species to outlast and outwit the challenges of the ancient world. These hybrid offspring could potentially embody an evolutionary sweet spot, combining Neanderthal endurance with Homo sapiens ingenuity. Their ability to think tactically and analyze situations, paired with their physical capability to execute demanding tasks, would have made them invaluable members of their communities. Socially, hybrids would have served as bridges between the two species, blending the cultures and practices of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Such hybrids might have carried the oral traditions and knowledge of both groups, uniting their strengths and creating a unique cultural fusion. The genetic evidence we see today suggests that this blending of species did indeed occur. Modern humans carry traces of Neanderthal DNA, which contributes to traits such as immune system robustness and even some physical attributes. This genetic legacy hints at how interbreeding not only created hybrids, but also enriched the gene pool of Homo sapiens, potentially giving them the physical advantages needed to thrive in colder environments. The fact that we have so many Neanderthal genes proves that they were much closer to us than we can imagine. These hybrids might have represented the future of both species. Stronger and more adaptable than either Neanderthals or Homo sapiens alone, they would have become a new kind of human, one capable of surviving and excelling in the rapidly changing Pleistocene world. While Neanderthals eventually vanished, outcompeted by Homo sapiens, their genetic legacy lives on in us. Indeed, the blood that coursed through this long extinct species had more in common with us than we once believed. In this scenario, which is based on archaeological facts, for millennia in the dense ancient forests of the Zagros Mountains of southwest Eurasia 50,000 years ago, two groups of humans lived. The Neanderthals, with their powerful build and deep-set eyes, had dominated the region for generations, their lives shaped by seasonal cycles and natural rhythms. Homo sapiens, taller and more agile, had only recently begun their journey into this rugged land, looking for new hunting grounds and territory. Perhaps it was the first step toward bridging a world they could not yet fully understand, a meeting that would echo through time, carried by the genes of those who would come after them. Nonetheless, scientists know surprisingly little about the time in human history when our species came together. When two populations are close but very different, because they speak different languages, have different traditions, or live in neighboring territories, they will exchange women. However, when we consider what occurred at the point of contact 50,000 years ago, we can see that all Homo sapiens have Neanderthal DNA, but no recent Neanderthal has modern Homo sapiens DNA. While the last Neanderthals carried archaic Homo sapiens DNA, but no modern Homo sapiens DNA. Furthermore, in regards to the distinction between modern humans and Neanderthals, many paleoanthropologists now recognize them as subspecies: Homo sapiens sapiens and Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, in accordance with their overlapping morphology and genetics. This is an important issue for understanding Neanderthal extinction and the precise interaction of the two populations. These traits, while specialized, made them formidable competitors in a world that tested survival at every turn. However, as Homo sapiens began to dominate the landscape and Neanderthal populations dwindled, these hybrids would have been absorbed into the broader Homo sapiens gene pool, leaving their physical and cognitive legacy to enrich future generations.
Neanderthals and the anatomically modern humans coming out of Africa engaged in a 100,000-year war and tried to wipe each other out. That story's here.
They were similar to us, but also profoundly different from us. There is a reason. We had the same ancestor. Then, around 500,000 years ago, the descendants of that ancestor began separate evolutionary paths in Europe and Africa, respectively. That gave rise to two distinct and different creatures, both human, however, both daughters of the same father, they in Europe and we in Africa. More than just competition. Despite the obvious differences between us and them, evolutionary proximity made genetic crossbreeding possible. There were interspecies hybridizations, rare events, probably not always fertile, but still possible, which left very lasting traces, still partially present in the DNA of many of our populations. So, in a sense, the Neanderthals did not go completely extinct, since some of their genetic heritage is still in us. It is almost incredible that we can still read this legacy of theirs in our genome today. Neanderthals disappeared from the scene 30,000 years ago is still much debated. Some scientists believe Neanderthals disappeared for reasons that did not involve violence, but others still believe their competition to take advantage of available resources was the cause of violence and genocide. Tolerance, as we well know, is indeed not a characteristic of us sapiens. Even today, a small difference in skin, language, or religion is cause for political contrasts and violence between groups or nations. Is it credible then that ancient sapiens were tolerant of a foreign human species? Or is it not more likely instead that when the sapiens encountered the Neanderthals, the result was the first and most drastic ethnic cleansing campaign in history? Well, with them we shared 99.7% of our DNA, and behaviorally, the differences were minimal.
I knew, of course, that DNA doesn't transfer between somatic cells and germ cells. And what happens in the soma to the DNA, if you get a mutation in your hand, it doesn't affect the DNA in your germ cells, which is the only DNA that counts for the next generation. But I thought that maybe another type of molecule would be able to transmit memories between generations. And the molecules that I thought about were small RNA molecules. RNA is a close cousin of DNA. It's a more ancient molecule that evolved before. The world used to be an RNA world, and RNA enabled inheritance before DNA existed. And I had reasons to believe that maybe small RNAs would be able to move from the soma to the germline. What small RNAs do is inside cells, they regulate gene activity. So they decide which genes will function and which won't. The next thing was that we thought that maybe it's not only about viruses. Maybe other traits can also be regulated using the same mechanism. And other memories can transfer between generations. And specifically, I was thinking about the memory of starvation. And the reason is that the biggest epidemiological study that has been done on humans on transmission of responses between generations was done on people that survived starvations in the past. In the Second World War, the Nazis starved large populations in the Netherlands. And people studied there are many descendants, the descendants of the individuals that were starved. And they saw that although there are no changes to their DNA as a result of the starvation, because this can't happen, the descendants suffer more from diabetes and from other neurological diseases such as schizophrenia. I thought maybe worms can explain it. Maybe what's being transmitted here are small RNAs. And this is a different type of inheritance than DNA. It's new rules of inheritance. To study this, we can do a really good starvation experiment in worms because we can really control their conditions. So what we did is we took worms and we either starved them or not. And when we starved the worms, we found that, that they make small RNAs that regulate the function of nutrition-related genes. They regulate their nutrition. But not only that, the interesting part was that these small RNAs moved also to the children, to the grandchildren, and to the great-grandchildren, and protected them and changed their nutrition-related genes as well. And this had real consequences on the physiology of the kids. So the descendants of starved worms lived significantly longer, and we now know that they are also more protected if you challenge them again with a much more difficult period of starvation. So it seems adaptive. The holy grail, one of the holy grails of this new field is to think whether the brain can generate heritable responses, whether memories that are formed in the brain are inherited, because normally when we think of memories that the brain can generate, and these are special memories. And this sounds crazy that you'll think about something, you learn it, and then it will be inherited. But we wanted to study this in worms, and we showed that in fact it happens. So small RNA changes in the brains of worms lead to transgenerational changes that affect multiple generations. If you change the population of the production of small RNAs in the brains of the ancestors, it changes the physiology and the behavior of the descendants, even the great-grandchildren.
With this information, I think the entire autistic community should be asking, one, why is RFK Jr. taking all our medical data? Why did they say they want to put autistic people on a registry? And why is he using epidemiologists on these medical research teams? It raises the question whether, especially in light of that 2024 Dr. Emily Casanova paper that found the rare Neanderthal variants in autistic people that were not in neurotypical people, whether our government thinks that autistic people might have a transgenerational memory of the 100,000-year war that went on between the Neanderthals and the anatomically modern sapiens. And those are the sapiens before they interbred with the Neanderthals. And we really need to be asking this question because the 100,000 years war was not the first time that these sapiens type, neurotypicals tried to wipe us out, tried to wipe out our neurotype population. As we have seen from the history of Hans Asperger, the autistic population was being separated during World War II into the higher functioning Aspies and everyone else. And they tried to wipe us out then. So now, first 100,000-year war ending in a genocide of purebred Neanderthals, a World War II effort to mop up the rest and wipe the rest of our neurotype out, even though we were evolving on in a hybrid human lineage. And now comes number 3. They want to put the autistic population on a registry. What comes next? This is where the autistic population needs to stand up and just say no. We are equally valid human beings. We are not second-class citizens. The science on autistic people is so more far advanced now than it ever has been even a decade ago. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s April 16, 2025 press conference also fails to mention the very fascinating study of Gandel et al., who includes Daniel Geschwind. Transcriptomic dysregulation occurs across the cerebral cortex in ASD. And what they studied is that at the molecular level, characterized by transcriptomic and epigenetic alterations, and it's a lot more complex than I'm going to go into, but basically they found across 11 cortical areas widespread transcriptomic changes across the cortex in autism spectrum disorder, exhibiting an anterior to posterior gradient with the greatest differences in the primary visual cortex, coincident with an attenuation of the typical transcriptomic differences between cortical regions. This study goes into a great amount of detail, but basically what it's saying and what it found is that by gene regulation, by gene expression, what's happening is that autistic people are exhibiting and mimicking a Neanderthal brain with a very powerful visual area and with a gradient of the gene expression from the front to the back of the brain. They're finding cortex-wide transcriptomic changes in ASD. Basically what that means is the entire autistic brain is different than the neurotypical brain. I provided the link to the Geschwind paper in my description down below. Now, the Geschwind paper is very, very complex, and you can go read it for yourself. But to try to simplify it, let's just ask for a minute, because RFK Jr. in his April 16, 2025 press conference, when he's saying it must be a toxin or it's an infectious disease, he mentions a couple things. He says it has to be an environmental factor. There are epigenetic factors at work, and what he's saying is they change gene expression. But again, this is like looking at the broken branch, the little teeny detail, without seeing the big evolutionary picture. So what is an epigenetic factor? Epigenetics is the study of how genes are expressed without changing the underlying DNA sequence. That's what the Gandel, Geschwind et al. Paper is all about, that I just covered. It involves chemical modifications to DNA and its associated proteins that can turn genes on or off, affecting how a cell functions. This allows organisms to adapt to changing environments quickly by altering gene expression, a process faster than changes in DNA sequence. And why would humans need to do that? Why would it be necessary for humans to adapt to changing environments quickly by altering gene expression, a process faster than changes in DNA sequence? You see, waiting for DNA mutations, waiting for changes in DNA sequence, if you have a rapidly changing environment, could extinct humans, or other animals. So you can't wait for changes in DNA sequences if you've got a rapidly changing environment. So we know we have a rapidly changing environment for several reasons. We have pollution of our air, our water, and our ground. We have toxins in our environments, microplastics, pesticides, BPA. We have all sorts of things that the Industrial Revolution put into our environment. Now, President Trump wants to bring back factories, so this environment is not going to change anytime soon, most likely. But we have other things going on too. We have a traveling magnetic North Pole going on, where it's moving towards Siberia. And we have places where the magnetic field is weakening with the Earth's magnetic field. We are overdue for a magnetic pole reversal. We're also seeing really strange phenomena recently happening with solar flares and with the aurora borealis. We're seeing rainstorms in the Sahara. We're seeing a collapsing Gulf Stream. There are many, many changes in our environment. We are seeing animal species migrating north. If humans cannot mutate their underlying DNA sequences fast enough to adapt to these environmental changes, we will all go extinct. But epigenetics is a way humans and other animals can rapidly adapt to rapidly changing environmental conditions so that we don't go extinct. And that's what epigenetics is about. It's the study of how genes are expressed without changing the underlying DNA sequence. It does this by gene transcription, turning the genes on and off. It's kind of a to help us not go extinct, we have to rapidly adapt kind of mechanism. How epigenetics works. Chemical modifications. Epigenetic changes involve modifications to DNA and the proteins that package DNA into chromatin, such as histones. DNA methylation. Histones can also be modified, e.g. acetylation, methylation, to alter the accessibility of DNA to gene regulatory proteins affecting gene expression. And that's what RFK Jr. was getting at with his comments about the glutathione and the other MFTHR. If I get that wrong, I'll correct it in my discussion below. But that's what he's getting at, is methylation. Non-coding RNAs. Small non-coding RNAs can also play a role in epigenetics by regulating gene expression. Rapid adaptation. Faster than genetic changes. Epigenetic changes can occur more rapidly than changes in the DNA sequence, enabling organisms to adapt quickly to environmental shifts. Environmental influence. Environmental factors can trigger epigenetic modifications, leading to changes in gene expression that can be passed down to future generations. Increased phenotypic variance. Epigenetics can increase the range of phenotypes within a population, which can facilitate adaptation to new or changing environments. Heritable epigenetic marks. Some epigenetic marks can be transmitted from one generation to the next, providing a mechanism for inheritance of acquired traits. Plasticity. Epigenetics enhances phenotypic plasticity, the ability of an organism to adapt its traits in response to environmental changes. Given the scientific knowledge, the Neanderthal introgression into anatomically modern humans, that it happened around the Zagros Mountains, which was a hybridization zone. But as I've shown in one of the video clips, it happened in other locations, including in Portugal with the Lapido child, which was a hybrid individual exhibiting a mixture of Neanderthal and early modern human features, who was dated to have lived around 28,000 years ago. That was in the Iberian Peninsula. What we have to understand about Neanderthals was that they had to adapt to a changing climate. They lived through much warmer interglacial periods than what we're living in today. They also lived during ice ages, which were extremely cold periods. They hybridized and interbred with denisovans. Denisovans are a highly adaptable, ancient part of the human lineage who lived with a range from the Altai Mountains in Siberia all the way down through Eastern and Southeast Asia into Papua New Guinea and into Australia. So they had a vast climate range of adaptation. They also lived at high altitudes in the Tibetan Plateau. And so all of these genes have been introgressed into the human population living today, so that some people have some of these variants and other people have others of these variants. And they've found that autistic people have at least 3 rare Neanderthal alleles that are not seen in the neurotypical population. So another thing Robert F. Kennedy Jr. doesn't mention, and this is extremely significant, is about a study about Neanderthal DNA that influences gene expression. So yes, there are studies that have shown that Neanderthal DNA, including transcription factor variants, can influence gene expression in modern humans, even in regions of the genome known as deserts, where Neanderthal introgression is relatively sparse. What does that mean? That means that according to the neurotypical narrative and how their narrative goes, they consider the Neanderthal DNA was so bad for today's modern humans that purifying selection, purifying the neurotypical humans today, purified Neanderthal DNA out of certain places in the human genome that they call gene deserts. And for example, in one of these gene deserts, you find the FOXP2 gene that has a lot to do with human language and the languages that we speak today. What this research paper found is that these archaic Neanderthal transcription factors, often called ACTFs, can alter the binding of regulatory proteins to DNA, impacting the expression of genes in downstream pathways, including in these parts of the modern genome known as gene deserts. In other words, the Neanderthals, when they became absorbed into this hybridized modern human population that still exists today, they gave this neurotypical superiority purifying selection idea kind of a tail slap that said, not so fast, because you inherited our Neanderthal DNA and it has transcription factors that can regulate these genes that are in the gene deserts. So not so fast. You're not going to get rid of certain human populations and subpopulations that are highly Neanderthalized that continue to evolve today. And one of these populations is at least some parts of the autistic population. This suggests that Neanderthal DNA can influence modern human phenotypes through its impact on gene expression, even in regions where Neanderthal ancestry is not abundant. Neanderthal inherited sequences have measurable impacts on gene expression and contribute to variation in modern human phenotypes. And this is the paper here by Yermakovich et al., Long-Range Regulatory Effects of Neanderthal DNA in Modern Humans, published in December 2022 in Genetics. And this paper needs to be read together with and integrated with the paper by Gandal and Geschwind et al., and also integrated and read together with Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s April 16, 2025 Autism Press Conference that is looking at epigenetic factors. Zeeberg et al. Also wrote a paper. Zeeberg and Svante Pabo also wrote a paper called The Genetic Changes That Shaped Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Modern Humans, here in Cell. And in that paper, they concluded that we discussed genetic differences among the groups of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans, and some of their functional consequences. As more present-day genome sequences become available from diverse groups, we predict that very few, if any, differences will distinguish all modern humans from all Neanderthals and Denisovans. We propose that the genetic basis of what constitutes a modern human is best thought of as a combination of genetic features where perhaps none of them is present in each and every present-day individual. A combinatorial view of human modernity. The occurrence of rare ancestral variants in cases where most people carry derived variances raises questions about how to define modern humans from a genetic perspective. To gain a perspective on this, it may be useful to consider how paleoanthropologists define Neanderthals and modern humans based on skeletal morphology using features such as the robustness of their skeleton, the presence of prominent brow ridges, and the elongated crania with occipital buns. Most of those features are derived in Neanderthals. However, these features can also be found in modern humans. Similarly, the genetic basis of the modern human phenotype should be seen as a combination of derived genetic features where not every feature is present in every modern human. Rather, some derived modern features may exist in their ancestral forms in some people today, either because they have persisted from the common ancestor of archaic and modern humans, or because of archaic gene flow. Thus, from a genetic perspective, modern humans can be defined as carrying combinations of derived variants which are common but not present in all of us today. Conversely, some derived genetic variants typical of modern humans are present in some archaic humans who lived late enough to carry variants that were introduced into archaic population from modern humans. Gene flow between archaic and modern humans offers a way to study the physiological consequences of many of the variants typical of both modern and archaic humans. In the case of variants that changed in modern humans, mixing between the groups often introduced the ancestral versions into present-day people. However, variants introduced by archaic gene flow are often rare, which limits our ability to study them. As variants that are rare in large populations will sometime have reached appreciable frequencies in smaller populations where random genetic drift plays a larger role than large populations. The phenotypic effects of some ancestral variants can therefore potentially be studied in small populations. Finally, it is important to keep in mind that when ancestral variants are associated with effects during development or in adult individuals, such ancestral variants are not in any sense primitive or pathological. They functioned well for hundreds of thousands of years in healthy archaic humans that were closely related to modern humans, and most of them presumably function well in people today. But we have to leave Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his autism registry with is that the genetic research into autistic people is not over. It's ongoing and continuing. And the blaming it on an infectious disease virus or on some kind of an environmental toxin is really an effort to mislead the American public. And that's so because you're looking at the one small branch detail of the bigger picture, which is a big picture of human evolution that is still ongoing, and scientific research that has shown that in some populations of autistic people, there are rare Neanderthal variants that are not shared with the general neurotypical population. And with all of this research about gene expression in autism that is telling us what's going on is that autistic people have a different brain and a different central nervous system, and what the gene expression is doing is it is helping humans evolve under rapidly changing environmental conditions and by epigenetics that is helping humans not go extinct. And this is no different than what Neanderthals had to do. And then you're seeing a Neanderthal type brain configuration via the gene expression from a gradient from the front to the back. You're seeing that even these neurotypical so-called purifying selection and gene deserts, that these Neanderthal transcription factors can actually reach genes in the gene desert, such as the FOXP2 gene. In essence, what's being built here is a human speciation. It is an evolutionarily different human to survive into the future. And RFK Jr. wants to pathologize that. He wants to call it a deficit, something to be stopped and prevented, a catastrophe to our country that will tear down our country. What's wrong with there being a human difference and human variation? It's important for the American public and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to understand that scientific evidence suggests that ancient human populations likely possessed greater genetic diversity than modern human populations. This is supported by the fact that our ancestors carried more DNA than we do today, and studies indicate that some genetic variation within early humans has been lost due to population bottlenecks and migrations. Which brings me to the ultimate conclusion from everything that I have analyzed, described, explained, and confronted in this video, that ultimately what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at his April 16th, 2025 Autism Conference is saying is that he's all for an autism registry. He wants to eliminate some of the human variation and diversity that is being added back in to modern humans that was lost since our ancient relatives. What's wrong for him is that, well, I still really doubt that he's ever met a real live autistic person. And that's a crying shame. It also affects his way of thinking. We are an autistic people. We are valid human beings. We are not lesser or second-class citizens. I have to wonder if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. ever got a passing grade in his constitutional law class at his Virginia Law School, because the way he speaks about autism sure doesn't sound like it. If I may borrow the words of Jim Sinclair, I invite you to look at our autism and look at your grief from our perspective. Autism isn't something a person has or a shell that a person is trapped inside. There's no normal child hidden behind the autism. Autism is a way of being. It is pervasive. It colors every experience, every sensation, perception, thought, emotion, and encounter, every aspect of existence. It is not possible to separate the autism from the person. And if it were possible, the person you'd have left would not be the same person you started with. Therefore, when parents say, I wish my child did not have autism, what they're really saying is, I wish the autistic child I have did not exist, and I had a different, non-autistic child instead. By Jim Sinclair, Don't Mourn for Us, Autism Network International. If I say to you, hi, I'm autistic, I'm saying that to you the same way as if I said, hi, I'm human. Being autistic is our identity. It's who and what we are. It's our neurotype of human. These facts about being autistic don't seem to be grasped by you or by your David Gear-led epidemiologist medical research teams. When you want to call us a deficit, a disease, pathological, when you only want to see negative qualities because, Autistic people are valid human beings. We love our country, we love our families, and we exist, and evidently, somebody needs to tell you that. Calling autism an epidemic violates science, disability rights, and the Constitution. Autism, in this political moment, is being recast as a public health crisis, not a developmental difference, not a form of neurodiversity, but a problem to be contained. This has happened, and it connects to the harmful rhetoric pushed by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has long promoted the false idea that autism is an epidemic caused by environmental factors or vaccines. By April 2025, he was holding press conferences calling for national autism registries and collaborating with government figures and ideologically aligned researchers to investigate what causes autism. But here's the constitutional problem. Much of this rhetoric and the policies that follow are rooted in creationist ideology that denies evolutionary science and the genetic basis of autism. That's just not bad science. It's a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. The Establishment Clause bars the government from endorsing or entangling itself with religious doctrine. When public agencies like HHS begin implementing policy based on a worldview that denies evolution and promotes pseudoscience, especially when it aligns with creationist beliefs, they are stepping outside the bounds of secular governance. And when those policies harm autistic people directly, by denying benefits, stigmatizing our existence, or attempting to catalog us in national registries, constitutional civil rights are both being trampled. Let's be clear. Autism is not an epidemic. That framing is scientifically false and deeply harmful. Autism is a naturally occurring neurodevelopmental variation with strong genetic roots and evolutionary grounding. Calling it a crisis or a disease to be eliminated isn't just misleading, it's dehumanizing. We are not public health threats. We are people. Autistic people deserve respect, not eradication, inclusion, not erasure, and constitutional protection, not religiously motivated stigma dressed up as public policy. So here's what I'm asking. Speak out against efforts to pathologize autism as an epidemic. Insist that agencies like HHS follow scientific standards like the DSM-5 TR. Call out policies and rhetoric rooted in anti-evolution or creationist ideology as violations of the Establishment Clause. Demand civil rights protections for autistic individuals, including protection from being subjected to religiously motivated discrimination. Autism is part of the diversity of human minds, and that diversity is worth protecting, scientifically, legally, and constitutionally. Avail yourself of legal representation if you feel you need to. Thank you for listening. And please share this if it resonates with you or if you're ready to stand in solidarity. That's my video for today. If you like my videos, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and you'll be notified of my future videos. Thank you for watching.